Jesus, the God of the persecuted. In the book of Acts, chapter 9, verse 3 to 4, it says, "As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?'" It says. This passage is about the conversion of Saul of Tarsus, the leading persecutor of Christians in his time. This was perhaps the greatest event in church history after the coming of the Spirit at Pentecost. It says, as Paul approached the gate of Damascus, suddenly a great light from heaven flashed around him. The light must have been very intense, for the time of the occurrence was around midday, as is stated in Acts chapter 22, verse 6. But still Saul recognized the brightness of the light, wherein the light represents the manifestation of Christ. At the sight, Saul, who was filled with awe, fell to the ground, and then a voice came from heaven that said, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He said. I think when you look at Saul on the road in verse 1 to 2 of chapter 9, you may see a very zealous man who actually thought he was doing God a service of favor by persecuting the church. According to Charles Spurgeon, Saul was a great man, and no doubt that on his way to Damascus, he rode a very high horse. But just few seconds was enough to change the man, and how soon did God brought him down, he said. You see, in spite of Saul's great learning, as mentioned in Acts chapter 26, verse 24, Saul was spiritually blind and did not understand what the Old Testament taught about the Messiah. Like many others of his countrymen, he stumbled over the cross, as 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 23 says, because he depended on his own righteousness and not on the righteousness of God. And many self-righteous religious people today do not see their need of a Savior, and even angry if you tell them that they are sinners. You know, Saul even went to get a letter of authority from the high priest to go as far as Damascus to hunt down the disciples of Jesus. And this was not an insignificant action, for the authority of the highest Jewish council was behind him. And that's why he was brave enough to do what he was doing at the time. You see, when Saul encountered Jesus on his way to Damascus to arrest the other Christians, his spiritual eyes were open, but his physical eyes were blinded. This was the time when Saul realized that he was lost, a sinner who was in danger of the judgment of God, especially when he heard, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," in verse 5. Because as Saul persecuted the church, he was actually persecuting Jesus, the Messiah. You know, God was actually humbling and preparing Saul for his plan to be used as the apostle to the Gentiles, as God was continuing to work out his plan to bring the gospel to the entire world. And see, God saved Paul by his grace and not by law, but through faith in the living Christ. And so God showed him the relationship between the gospel of the grace of God, and the traditional Mosaic religion that he practiced all his life, which turned him from Jesus' most zealous persecutor to his most fervent or zealous witness. My dear friends, Paul's conversion or salvation is certainly a great encouragement to any lost sinner. For if Paul, the chief of sinners, could be saved, surely anybody can be saved as well. So like Paul, if you haven't received the free gift of salvation that Jesus is offering you today, please do so now and surrender your lives to Him and receive God's salvation through His grace before Jesus will arrest you at the time when you are not ready. Or if you are persecuted for the sake of Christ, Do not be dismayed, for Jesus is with you. Thank you.